In this video, I'm covering the 3 most common habits that are preventing you from much better cold calling results. Not only have I made thousands of cold calls, I've overseen thousands of cold calls during my time as an SDR manager and the hundreds of reps I've coached, so I can literally feel and sense when cold calls start going south. I've seen the most common moments when prospects start giving you the defensive tone, things are going well, and then all of a sudden they go south and you have no idea why. These are the 3 most common ones I've boiled it down to, so I'm going to make sure you're aware of these so that you can eliminate them and start getting better results. So let's get into it. So first, I'm starting with the big one. This is the first area I go to when a rep needs help improving their results in cold calling. There's always so many different areas that you can start, but the #1 worst habit is passive language. You need to replace passive language with stronger, more assumptive language. And I'm going to give examples of both in a second, but it's not just the passive language. The passive language is usually accompanied by a passive tonality that usually has an upward inflecting tone. And you want to replace this with a stronger, assumptive, downward inflecting tone. And this is all subconscious. Reps don't realize what passive language is normally, nor a passive tone, nor when the prospect's listening to you are they identifying that you're using passive language or a passive tonality. It's all subconscious, but it stems from a lack of confidence and a lack of conviction in what you're actually asking for, which is usually just a symptom of being new. If you know anything about the human mind, you don't need to be a psychologist to know that this stuff is really important in how your message is perceived. Tonality is 90% of your success on cold calls. It's not what you say, it's how you say it. So some of the most common examples of passive language I see, it comes around the time you're looking to ask for the meeting. You put these little caveats on there like, if possible, I'd love to set up some time next week. It usually starts with an if possible, if you're interested, are you open to it? I'd love to set up some time next week if you're available, things like that. And what this subconsciously does is it makes the path of least resistance for the prospect to say no. They pick up on this in their head, and that's when you get these responses like they might pause and be like, and you were so close to getting them to, and they're like, you know what, can you just send me an email? I'll circle it to my team, and then we'll reach out if we have any questions or anything like that. And as we know, 99.99% of the time, they're not getting back to you. So simply by replacing passive language with stronger, more assumptive language, it's such an easy fix, but it dramatically boosts your results of getting the meeting because it turns the path of least resistance into them saying yes. So examples, instead of saying, if possible, are you open to it? Say, great, I'm looking to set up some time next week just to get introduced and aligned with your priorities going forward. How's your calendar look next week on Wednesday or Thursday? It's things like, I'm looking to set up some time. Let's set up some time next week. How's your calendar look next week? This has a very assumptive undertone to it, like you're expecting this to happen. You're not asking whether this happens. And of course, it's always up to the prospect whether they say yes or no. But this is just a small little language and tonality tweak that dramatically improves results. And if we're gonna put in all this work to actually make cold calls and we wanna improve our results any way we can, this is the main area I've identified as being an easy fix and also rapidly improving results without changing that much about your cold call script. And there's 2 critical moments. One I just covered is when it's time to ask for the prospect for the meeting. You want to make sure you're using strong assumptive language with a downward inflecting tone. The other key area is at the cold call opening so that you can actually get into telling them who you are, why you're calling, and what you want. And the key here is the inflection. So what I like to do is give a downward inflecting assumptive formality. Hey Jem, this is Connor Murray calling from X company. How are you? That's a lot different than, hey Jem, this is Connor Murray calling from X company. How are you today? The first one signals, I'm not here to waste time. I've been here and done this before. Just give me a formality back and then I'm gonna get right into telling you why I'm calling. The second one signals like, I'm looking for some back and forth here and we just interrupted the prospect's day. That's the last thing they want. This isn't all swirling in the prospect's head, but it's perceived subconsciously. You want to replace that passive upward inflecting tonality with a more assumptive downward inflecting tonality wherever you can, and it's going to reduce friction across the entire cold call. So that's a big one, but the next one is overcomplicating the whole cold call process. And I think this is a symptom of all the different sales training that's out there, all the different LinkedIn influencers, all the different YouTube content. There's so many different tactics. Everyone has different styles. This channel and what I'm about, I subscribe that less is more, and I'm looking to avoid variance wherever possible. Ideally, my cold calls go the same way every single time. I give an assumptive formality, I get an assumptive formality back. That's the purpose of the opening, and then I get right into taking control and telling them who I am, why I'm calling, and what I want. That's why I don't like the permission-based openers. I've never been a fan of pattern interrupts. It's never been my style because it creates variance. There's so many different responses they could have to that. And another problem is most people, instead of telling them who they are, why they're calling, and what they want, which is time on their calendar, they start asking too many questions too early on in the cold call, almost discovery style. And that's how a lot of reps are trained, is that they almost have to run discovery calls on cold calls. So they might tell them who they are, but then they just start asking a bunch of questions and it almost sounds like a survey, and you haven't built any value with the prospect yet. You just interrupted their day, and it's a little disrespectful. You're not trying to be, but you're almost giving off the vibe that like, oh yeah, you have all day to answer all these questions. I just interrupted you out of the blue. Like you're not busy. You don't have a full-time job. There's nothing you're working on. You have 5-10 minutes to answer all my questions. And that's when you start getting these defensive tones that are really hard to overcome. Once you start getting that defensive tone, they're signaling, I want nothing to do with this, but I'm not yet at the point where I'm ready to just straight up hang up on you. But that's when they start interjecting, and then they just end up hanging up on you before you even got a chance to tell them why you're calling. That's why I prefer to take control, tell them who I am, why I'm calling, what I want, and then save the questions for after that if they're still engaging with you. There's a saying in hockey. I'm not even a big hockey guy. I follow it, but I was always more of a basketball guy. I'm from Boston though, big hockey area. It's pucks on net. And what that's basically saying is it's never really a bad thing to be getting shots on net because you're giving yourself probabilities of scoring the goal. I think it's the same thing in cold calling. When you overcomplicate permission-based openers and then you start asking a bunch of questions, you're not actually giving yourself a shot on net till you tell them what you're looking for, which is time on their calendar. Now you're on the playing field and you've given yourself a non-zero probability of booking the meeting. That's why I like to do this out of the gate. That's why on this channel I always talk about my value statement framework, because it's an easy, repeatable process that's designed to help me move fast at scale, but at the same time at a high quality. All right, last common bad habit, and it doesn't really even have so much to do with the cold call itself, but it's what I call self-induced friction. So this often looks like reps coming each day to work without a plan in place. They're just like, oh, who am I gonna cold call today? What list do I have to build? Do I have a script that's ready? You wanna prepare in advance what you're going to be doing each day. This is why I always talk about coiling the spring and doing all of that busy day-to-day drudgery up front. Build all of your lists, build the cold call scripts and email templates that associate with those lists, and then you can just focus on execution going forward. I still plan out what I'm gonna be doing each day in advance, but I like to have all that work done up front. This prevents overthinking too. A lot of reps spend way too much time. They hesitate so much before making a cold call. They feel like they gotta scour the prospect's LinkedIn. When in reality, in most cases, it's not some little nugget you find on LinkedIn that's gonna be the difference maker of whether you book the meeting. It generally has to do with your tonality. Do you sound confident and competent and someone who's worth spending more time with? So when you overthink or you try too hard to be a perfectionist, you actually just slow yourself down and give yourself less shots on net. Rather than spending 30 minutes trying to make the perfect cold call, you should make 10 cold calls in that time period, because really what you're doing here is you're selling time. A lot of reps feel the responsibility that they need to be prepared to sell their solution on a cold call, when in reality, if you work in tech or software sales or anything that's big ticket, you are rarely ever actually closing a sale or actually convincing the prospect in a meaningful way of your value proposition on a cold call. The point of the cold call is to get them to a meeting where you can then prepare and deliver that message and start a cycle from there. So a lot of reps just overthink what their responsibility is on a cold call. You don't need to be prepared for every single possible outcome or to sell your whole solution. You want to pull it back to selling time. You want to give off enough value for them to think it's worth spending more of their time with you. And that's why it's important to plan in advance, coil the spring, do all that work up front so that you don't have to overthink and be a perfectionist. You can just focus on execution every single day. So these are the big 3 bad habits, and notice how I'm suggesting you eliminate this stuff. It's the process of elimination. Most of the time, the way to get better at cold calling is not through addition, it's from subtraction. It's subtracting from things that are creating discomfort and friction, and the prospect feels it. And these are the most common areas I've identified. So hope this helped. If it did, hit the like button, and I'll see you on the next one.